Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, Episode 1. My name is Betsy Potash, and I'm here to help you inspire your English students with creative teaching strategies and projects. Whether you're new to the profession or an experienced teacher, if you love to see your students' eyes light up, you're in the right place. What you probably don't know about me is what a disaster my first day of teaching was. In this episode, I'm going to tell you how that awful first day has shaped my career and led me to a teaching strategy I call showcase projects. I'm going to explain what they are and how I use them, then give you 5 of my favorite examples. So let's dive in. So I imagine as teachers, we really all remember our very first day of school. It's one of those super important moments in our lives that just becomes crystal clear. And when I look back on my first day, I remember that it was terrible. In every way, it was terrible. It was my first job. I was 22, right out of college. And I woke up at 5 in the morning, so excited. Put on my professional brand new clothes, picked up my brand new leather briefcase, went in, got everything ready, and met my first class with a ton of enthusiasm. And I had planned for that first day to do a lecture. I was going to tell them about the class, pass out my syllabus, tell them about my expectations, about myself. And I launched into it, totally excited. And it fell flat. It didn't go over. The students were bored. They were checking their watches. They were glancing toward the door within 15 minutes. And I knew I had to keep going because I didn't have any backup plan. As a new teacher, a brand new teacher, I didn't have those 2 or 3 strategies in my back pocket that I could always switch to that I've since developed. So I was stuck, and it was one of the worst days I've ever had. I had to go through the same thing in all my classes. And it was the first time I ever realized that you could be saying one thing and thinking something completely different. So I was humming along, talking about what the course was going to be like. And inside my head, I was just thinking, am I going to have to quit? Is this going to be the end of my teaching career? What is even going on? This is a nightmare. And my students were probably thinking something a bit similar about their chances of having a good class for the year. It was just a terrible day. So at the end of the day, I remember I was just laying on the floor of my office crying. And I think I cried for like 2 hours. It was so terrible. But at the end of it all, I kind of changed gears and came up with a new way to teach. And since then, in almost a decade of teaching, I've never lectured. That's not how I put material across. I've decided that I want to be more of a guide for my students and less of a guru. And that has led me in so many creative directions. Really, I'm pleased with the decision. I'm glad I had that terrible first day because it's led me down this path of creativity and of getting out from behind the podium and mixing into my classroom, trying to create a truly creative community where I am pushing students along their own paths instead of saying, listen to me, I will show you the way. It's a very different style of teaching. And one strategy that I use that really makes it work is the showcase project. And that's the subject of today's show. I mean, when I use these major projects embedded in each unit, it creates so much more engagement for the students. It takes material that they may not love and it lights it up. It makes it exciting for them. And so I'm going to start here by talking about a showcase project that I did as a student and then talk about the ones that I have done as a teacher. Well, some of them, to give you ideas for your own classes. So let me take you back a few years to when I was a high school junior and I was studying the book Madame Bovary. I have to say, I hated Madame Bovary. I didn't really get why it was so significant. It was a little dull for me. I was not excited. I liked my teacher. I liked the class. I was super into literature, but I thought Madame Bovary was a snooze. And so when my teacher introduced this project that we were going to put on a trial of the author of Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert, my ears perked up a little bit because I thought, well, at least we're going to be doing something a little more exciting, some new way of talking about this novel. And so I signed up to be the defense lawyer of Gustave Flaubert in his obscenity trial. He was actually put on trial for offending the public decency with his novel, Madame Bovary. And right away, I was super interested in this. And as I met with my defense team in class, I found out that there were actual transcripts of the original trial. And I asked my teacher, can I have the transcripts? Do you have them? Can I get them? And she was like, oh, well, I don't know if that would be fair. I'm not going to get you the transcripts. And my mind was just humming. How can I get those transcripts? I want to do the very best on this project that I possibly can. And I actually went and got a guest pass at the local university library so that I could get the transcripts and read the whole original trial. And I brought it into class, and I found all these other resources. I think I came up with like an 8-page opening statement. And basically, my defense team just flattened the prosecution in the trial. And it was such a joy to me. I still am just grinning as I'm talking about it because I remember it with so much happiness. And so that's the kind of thing I want to give to my students. I want to give them these projects that will create a new relationship between them and the text so that they will truly engage with it and be interested in it the way I suddenly was with Flaubert and the story of Madame Bovary. I went from sort of a tepid non-participant to super hyper engaged. And that's, of course, what we all dream of as teachers. So let me tell you a little bit about 5 of the projects that I've used, showcase projects. I'm just going to tell you briefly, and hopefully it will give you some inspiration to come up with showcase projects of your own, because this is such a great strategy for increasing student engagement. The first showcase project that I came up with was during my first year of teaching, and I was about to introduce a poetry unit with a text that I didn't absolutely love. It was mandated by my school. It was called 6 American Poets, and it was fine. It featured some wonderful canonical poets, but I didn't feel like the students were just automatically going to fall in love with this. Perhaps you can relate from some of your own poetry units. And so I was looking everywhere, trying to figure out what's going to be my hook. What kind of project can I do with this poetry that's going to make the students love it? And I did find something in my late night internet perusing. I discovered Poetry Slam for the first time, and I was watching all these videos, looking up documentaries, ordering books from my local library, and I quickly put together this unit on Poetry Slam so that as we were reading the canonical poets, we were also watching these videos of modern voices, and we were workshopping poems of our own that we were going to put on. And I did it all in just 5 days. It was a 5-day poetry slam. And in retrospect, I think that was extremely ambitious, but it really worked out. My students got together in committees. They came up with ideas for the ambiance of the slam, for who was going to judge it, for what the programs were going to be like, what kind of food we were going to have. And by Friday of that very week, we had read some wonderful American poets. We had watched and scored all these slam clips during class, and we had workshopped written poems and practiced performing them, and we put on slams in every single one of my English classes that week. There was a totally different, totally incredible poetry slam. It was so much fun. And I think in the memory of those students, that week is going to be embedded in their minds the way Gustave Flaubert's obscenity trial is embedded in mine. It was such an epic week for them. On the one hand, they were so nervous about these poetry slam pieces that they were practicing, but on the other hand, they were so jazzed for it. They were watching these incredible clips every day. They were reading Langston Hughes. They were thinking about poetry all the time, and they were, creating the actual event themselves. I didn't do all the work for the event because I felt like they'd be more invested, and that was, in fact, the case. So it was a wonderful week, and I've since done Poetry Slam every year with my students whenever there's any opportunity. If we're doing any poetry at all as part of the mandated curriculum, then I try to work in a Poetry Slam. So the second showcase project that I've done as a teacher that's been really successful is a progressive play project. And I've done this with several plays, and the inspiration comes from my own wonderful Shakespeare professor in college, Martha Andreessen. She taught a course in which students would always break up the text into the different play sections. So one group would do each act of a play, and they would put it on in their own way in a different location around campus. And they would rehearse all semester. And then on the last day of the class, students would watch the play, Act 1 in one location, and then walk to Act 2, walk to Act 3. And it was all different themes, different styles, different costumes, different props. But it was incredible. It didn't need to match. It was better because it didn't match. And so I've done this with my students with Long Day's Journey into Night and with Death of a Salesman. And in both cases, it was a wonderful experience. So I would introduce the idea very early in the unit. So as we were reading the play, they were really reading it knowing that they were going to perform a section for the class, and they were reading it almost from the perspective of the character that they were going to perform, because every few days they would have a rehearsal day. They would be working on their scene. They would be thinking about the props and the blocking and the sets and their location and the program. And so they had all these crucial aspects right in mind, the way we want students to when we're reading theater. And so it was very helpful in getting them to engage with the play in both cases. And in both cases with each of those plays, the final performances were a delight. And it was really moving to walk around campus to see students putting on their own interpretation of these powerful and sad plays. So that's number 2. Number 3, moving on here, I want to talk about a group of seniors I had that was so unbelievably unengaged. This was when I was teaching abroad in Bulgaria, and my seniors were 19. They had both feet out the door. There were a few weeks left of school, and we were doing the personal essay. And so I decided to frame the unit through National Public Radio's This I Believe segment. They have a wonderful series online, which I will link in the show notes of the podcast, to help educators teach the personal essay through this framework of the This I Believe NPR radio segment. So you help students to come up with some passionate belief, and it doesn't have to be a religious belief. It can be something like, I believe in gelato. But they have to really explore the belief through specific stories and make it full of anecdotes and details to hook a listener. And so as I introduced this personal essay project, I said, look, we're actually going to do radio pieces. You're going to perform these pieces out loud in a live radio show for our class and for whatever guests we invite. And we're also going to submit these essays to National Public Radio for publication. And it took personal essay from sort of a chore that they couldn't wait to be done with to something really exciting. 2 of the students did have their pieces published with National Public Radio. And the event that we had in the sort of main, I don't know what to call it, it was like a lounge in our building. We put up microphones, we had a stage, we had programs, and the students did a wonderful job of performing their pieces for each other. It was powerful to hear all of these deeply held beliefs. I mean, some of them were funny, but some of them were really intense and wonderful. And so it ended up being a fantastic unit for all of us. And I think, again, it was because of this idea of building in a showcase project. Don't just go through the motions of the unit, but build in an audience, build in this final culminating moment that's something for students to get excited about. All right, so moving on. Number 4, the Canterbury Tales. Have you taught it? Did it go well? If so, we should talk. I launched into the Canterbury Tales with a class of 10th graders that was probably 65% English language learners, and it was such a struggle. It is not the text I would have chosen for that particular group of students at that particular time in their education, but again, it was the text that was chosen for me. So I was trying to find a way to get them to engage with the idea that the words themselves were so hard for them to understand. And so I wanted them to be invested somehow in this concept of a storytelling festival. So as we read and as we were trying to parse out the meaning behind these tales and even understand a little bit of the humor and the detail, I decided that we were going to tell tales of our own in our very own storytelling contest. And this is the point at which I think the students started to engage with the material. So I said, look, guys, as we read these tales, we're going to come up with tales of our own. We're going to practice performing them. And we're going to go on our own pilgrimage around school, stopping every once in a while for one of you to tell your tale. And at the end, we're going to vote. We're going to give awards for the best tales. We're going to eat some good food together. And we're going to celebrate having made it through this crazy wild ride with Chaucer. And in the end, it was such a success. I enjoyed it so much, listening to all these different stories. And I think passersby on campus enjoyed it. I think the students who were initially so nervous, as with many of these showcase moments, just felt so good about themselves by the end. And so I considered it a huge success. All right, fifth and finally, I want to talk about a reading festival that I did with students after doing a free choice reading unit. So I had never tried this before, but I wanted to give students a chance to read a book of their choice. In this case, I was teaching entirely students who were speaking English as their second language, although it was a basic literature class. It wasn't an English as a second language class, but I had that knowledge of my students that they were approaching it with that background. And I wanted them to fall in love with literature written in English, just from their own free choice. I wanted them to each get to pick a book to read, whatever they wanted. And so that's what we did, but I wanted more. I didn't want them to just read a book and enjoy it. I wanted them to read it and then share it. And so we decided to have an outside reading festival, and the students would create projects about their books, and then we would have this big event at lunch one day and invite the underclassmen to come and see the projects and see the books and maybe find some books that they would want to read to also further their own interest in English literature. And so each student chose their book, did a beautiful project to display, and we had this event. We had food, we had music, we invited all these ninth graders, and it was just sort of a huge literature fiesta, which is kind of a dream come true for an English teacher like me. And again, I just felt like it took the project, which was fun, read a book of your choice, but it elevated it so much to give them this for their audience, to let them know that they were working towards something really special. So there you have it. Those are 5 showcase projects that I've had the pleasure to teach, and 1 showcase project that I had the pleasure to enjoy as a student. I hope in all this you find some inspiration. Thanks so much for joining me here today. If you'd like to check out the show notes for related links and further information, go to www.nowsparkcreativity.com and click on the podcast tab on the top menu. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes so you'll automatically get the upcoming episodes on free choice reading, easy strategies for differentiation, and using theater in your classroom.